FY 2022 budget workshop.
All right, thank you and good afternoon. We have a very festive budget workshop for you today. I could not think of a better way to get us all into the holiday spirit than pouring through the district's budget for a little while here. And as many of you have commented, 2020 has certainly brought its share of challenges. Our budget process and our budget planning is you can add that to the list of issues that have been complicated by this pandemic. So we're going to get into that today. Normally we'd just be kicking off the budget process for next year, but today we need to spend a little time on multiple budget years. So I hope to conjure up some ghosts from budget past, budget present, and budgets yet to come as we trying to stick with the theme here. Anyway, so we've got a lot of good information for you. I'll go ahead and jump in. On FY21, we were anxiously awaiting an executive order. That came out on November 30th, just after the Thanksgiving break. And, that order was a lengthy order, had a lot of components to it. One of the big things we were watching was, would we still have the flexibility, or would parents and students have that choice to continue online instruction for the spring semester? And that was included in that. Parents do have that choice. There is a provision, though, if students are struggling in the online format, that we are to reach out to those families and try to bring them back into the classroom. There is a waiver process if families are adamant that they're not coming back to the classroom, but that's one thing we're working through. And then there was a plan that had to be submitted, and this is like the spring 2021 education plan. And all school districts across the state were required to have a plan submitted by yesterday, December 15th. And those plans basically commit to providing a full array of services for our students to help, avoid any further learning loss and to catch kids back up. And Dr. Sheffield's our expert in that area. I've exhausted my knowledge. I'll move ahead to the financial piece of the executive order. And there was a financial continuity component that essentially gives us a one-year reprieve on our concern about the enrollment loss and the funding implications. So we were, you will recall, we had a commitment from the governor in Executive Order number 6 that would hold us harmless for the first semester. What they've done is they've basically extended that for the remainder of the school year. And it's great news, right? This is welcome news. This is, helps, get us out of the woods for this year, but we still have a concern looming with our enrollment for next year. There's no expectation that the state will be able to continue this, and everyone's budgets will reset based on actual enrollment for next school year. This year they came up with new methodology because most of the state was declining, that they're going to hold districts that are in declining enrollment, they're going to hold us to our original projections and continue to fund us on that. And then whatever growth is out there across the state, and it's expected to be relatively small, that all districts would then do like a prorated amount, prorated contribution to fund that growth elsewhere. So for us, the difference was we were looking at a potential loss of $30 million. The estimate provided by FDOE reduced that adjustment down to $1.2 million. It is an estimate. We're not going to know the true number till probably April, but I expect it to be $2 million or less, which is a far better scenario than that loss of $30 million. So, I haven't always been a big fan of Commissioner Corcoran, but I think after this, I may have to consider putting him back on the Christmas card list. Because this truly, they listened to Dr. Fenoy provided input through FADS, I provide input through the Finance Council, and they essentially took our recommendations and embedded them in the order. So that was really a pleasant surprise. The enrollment, I keep harping on this, but this was significant. We lost basically 10 years worth of enrollment growth when we opened schools this year. We dropped over 7,300 students. And this is not a Palm Beach phenomenon. This is playing out across the country, but it's still a significant concern. And we hope, I know in working with my colleagues here, that there's a lot of effort going into re-engaging our students and trying to make sure that, some families have gone to private school or home education. There's others that may just be disengaged entirely, and we've got to work to get these kids back in school. So that's going to be, that's ongoing, and we'll be doing even more when we come back in January. On COVID, you guys, we've bought a lot of stuff. We bought $25 million worth of computers to get to the 1-to-1 ratio. And then within the COVID grant, We're charging a lot of things with PPE. We did some professional development and extra duty days to get the school year started. We were able to charge our summer program last summer to the CARES Act grant. We provided internet hotspots to try to make sure every student had access to the internet. A lot of extra cleaning, face coverings, wipes, disinfecting wipes for the classrooms, plexiglass. You can see, but some of the numbers are staggering of how much materials we've had to buy. The bottom line is we expect to spend about $45 million in COVID-related cost, and that's about $10 million more than our share of the initial CARES Act grant. And last week, we were excited. We had an item to put on your agenda where the county may be able to help us out with some of those costs, up to $10 million. Now, we're closely watching the stimulus conversations going on in Washington now, and Ms. Solnit's providing us periodic updates. And there's one kind of unintended consequence there. And we're going to get it, Ms. Canuse is going to get into the CARES Act more, but I do want to point out that one of the provisions in the stimulus package being discussed now would give counties and states another year to spend any money they've received already. And if that comes to pass, the county will no longer be able to give us that $10 million. They're going to hang on to it and use it for, future COVID costs within Palm Beach County. So that was one negative component of what's being discussed there, at least on our side. The much bigger upside is that there may be stimulus for K-12 education again, and it's going to be badly needed. On our reserve, we worked hard in this adopted budget that you passed in September to include a reserve for what we were concerned about potential mid-year state cuts and additional costs related to COVID-19. We started the year with a $42 million reserve, and it currently stands at $42.4 million. And so there's been, the monies have ebbed and flowed to some extent. We did have to tap into it for certain costs, but then we also resized, adjusted our school budgets based on count day to recover some savings. And we did that through a softer general approach. We tried to make sure we didn't leave schools in a bad spot where they couldn't serve their kids. So we took a much softer approach, but there were some adjustments, and basically it's kind of washed out. So we still have that $42.4 million for this current year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our renowned economist, Ms. Heather Canust. She's going to provide an economic update and then start getting into the forecast for next year.
Well, it's good to see you all in person because my last meeting was virtual, so it's good to actually physically be here and be out of my relegated A wing that I could enter into the C wing over here. But I am going to try to quickly go through the economic update because much of this information you've already heard. We're going to start with the GDP and looking at the national GDP, and you might wonder, why are we looking at the national GDP if we're here in Palm Beach County? Because if you look back historically, the Florida economy trends and follows the same trends as the GDP. So if we look into more detail into the quarterly changes that have occurred in GDP after the pandemic, there was a lot reported about that significant decline in the second quarter of 30%. And then subsequently in the third quarter, there was a significant spike in the annualized GDP of 30%. So you would think, oh, well, we're in a great place, we're kind of back to normal. But if you were to take that and take those assumptions, forecast it out, this analysis was performed by PFM using Moody's Analytics as well, using optimistic assumptions related to the trends of the rollout of the vaccine, and that we're able to stem the tide of the spike in new cases, even taking into the consideration that significant increase in the third quarter. We're still not projected to be back to pre-COVID levels until the end of 2021. And if you take into account more pessimistic assumptions and outlooks, it could possibly go into 2023, 2024. So there is still a bit of time that it's going to take for us to recover from this pandemic. So now we're going to look at unemployment. So this is a historical look of unemployment. I'm looking at the green line is Florida, the red line is US, going back to the 1970s. And you can see that, with the pandemic, there was a significant spike that was really unprecedented related to the pandemic increase in unemployment. And then there was also a resulting significant drop, unprecedented as well. So we went up to 14%, down to 6%. So the question is, what is really going to happen with unemployment? Are we going to see it continue to decline? With the rise in new cases, are we going to see unemployment increase? There's still a lot of uncertainty. And you're hearing every day on the news, we get updates as to what's going on with the new cases. And we know that there's been a spike, not only here in Florida, but nationally. So now we're going to shift closer to looking, back in Florida and the revenue streams that really impact K-12 education. And K-12 is funded in Florida primarily through two revenue sources, property taxes, and the state portion of the funding is funded through general revenue. And when you look at general revenue, the largest component of general revenue, the largest appropriation is education. Education includes not only K-12, but it also includes higher ed. It's everything related to education. And when you look at what revenue streams make up general revenue, the largest source is sales tax. So that's why we're always looking at and focusing on property taxes and sales tax. So now digging a little bit deeper into sales tax collection, these charts show a comparison year over year, 2020 and 2019, month to month, so you can see the changes in sales tax collections. So when our state shut down, you see a significant decline in sales tax collections. The chart in the upper right-hand corner is statewide. I also have Palm Beach, and then we also have Orange County, so that you can kind of see the variation. You can see as our state reopened, sales tax collections started to increase. We had a slight dip, based on the most recent information in August, and Palm Beach County is following the same trends as statewide. And based on the most recent information, local information we received, we're expecting to see in Palm Beach County an increase in sales tax collections, and we hope to see that trend statewide as well. But if you go and you look at Orange County, it is a very different picture because they're so dependent on tourism. So they have a much more significant gap that they need to make up. And that last chart on this slide, I'm sorry it is a little busy, but I was trying to get everything on there. You look at the bar chart and it's state visitors, because our state is very dependent on tourism. And this chart shows a projection out to 2030 as to what our projected state visitors look like. And we're not looking, it's not projected that we'll get back to pre-COVID levels of visitors until 2022, 2023. And that is statewide, it's not specific to any county. So now focusing on property taxes. Property values in FY21, they increased by 5.5%. So they have stayed strong. But the property values are assessed in January. So that was really pre-COVID. So we're waiting to see what's going to happen in FY22. So there's already been an adjustment in the growth. Originally, property values were expected to grow over 5%, as they have been over the past several years. But that growth has been revised down to 1.6%. So it's still not a projected decline, but the growth is less than what was anticipated. And in looking at local property taxes, it not only impacts our FEFP funding, it also impacts our 1 mil referendum that we have. So if we do potentially have a decrease in property values, we will have a corresponding reduction in revenue. And not only related to the referendum, but also capital projects. And when you're looking at property values, there's really two components of property values, that residential piece and the non-residential piece. And in looking at the residential, like I mentioned, that has been relatively strong, but it is going to be dependent on unemployment, what happens with unemployment, as well as whether we're going to see an increase in foreclosures, and then therefore it's going to have depress the values of the residential property. And when looking at residential, the composition of taxable values, residential properties make up 73% of the statewide taxable values and 80% in Palm Beach County. So that's what those two numbers are. And then looking at the non-residential, that's just the remainder. And when you're looking at non-residential, the largest component of non-residential is commercial property. And we know commercial property has been hit hard with this pandemic. So we've seen a lot of retail stores close. And then also a reduced need for office space, because a lot of businesses are seeing they can have workers work from home, so they're starting to use that as a way that they can reduce costs. So we are going to be monitoring what is happening with the commercial market and how that is potentially going to impact property values. So we have a lot of uncertainty with just the whole revenue outlook and where we're going to stand, not only nationally, but in the state of Florida. So looking at the legislative timeline, in November, we got a new Senate president, we have a new House Speaker. In the upcoming months, we're going to be getting the new revenue estimates for the state, and the governor is going to be releasing his budget. Because we're in an odd year, 2021, the legislative session starts a little later. It's going to be starting March 2nd, and the last day of the session is April 30th, assuming we don't have any special session. So what is the legislative session going to look like for K-12? What are the priorities going to be? So based on the most recent EDR report that came out, I believe it was in August, the state of Florida is facing a $5.5 billion loss in revenue in FY21 and FY22 combined. We have, since that projection was released, received some very positive information in general revenue, that general revenue is coming in higher than what was originally projected in that estimate. So whenever we have months where revenue is coming in higher than what was originally projected, that will help to reduce that $5.5 billion estimated shortfall. We also have to go back and look and see, well, what are the priorities of the new Senate president? And if we go back to his speech, he was very focused on making sure that Florida has a structurally balanced budget, meaning if we're going to have a reduction in revenue, then our appropriations have to be reduced as well. And we have to make sure that we're not using one-time monies in order to balance our budget, the Florida budget, because otherwise we're going to put our bond rating at risk, which is something that they're not willing to do. But he was also clear that they're not going to just be making cuts. They're also going to have to make investments as well. So is education going to be one of the priorities of the legislature where they're willing to invest and not make cuts? And so that's something that we're going to have to be able to wait and see. So we are facing significant uncertainties going into FY22. Not even just FY22, but really FY23 and probably even to FY24. As Mr. Burke stated, enrollment is that is how we build our budget. That's how we know what revenue we have. So knowing how much of our enrollment is going to rebound is going to have a significant impact for the upcoming year. We have to make sure that we align and right-size our budgets to make sure that our staffing aligns with our enrollment. We have to make sure that we comply with the state mandates. We know that it's been a priority of the state to fully fund and to right-size FRS, to bring down that rate of return to what is recommended. So we are expected to have another increase of about $15 million this year, and that's probably going to continue in the upcoming years as well, because instead of doing a large hit, they're trying to do gradual reductions, although those gradual reductions are still very significant. But they have a significant amount they need to reduce in order to get to that recommended rate of return. And then in addition, looking at the textbook adoptions cost more than the textbook categorical that we're receiving from the state. So that the categorical has not increased and aligned with the increase in our actual spend. We also have that outstanding charter school referendum litigation that we're waiting to hear the final results on. And with COVID, we just have now an increased normal operating costs. We have increased costs for cleaning, increased costs for PPE, and increased costs for just the supports of supporting the children in this transitioning time, to try to support them in the period of learning loss. So with all these additional costs, we are hopeful that we will see an additional federal stimulus. The most current federal proposal that is out there would allocate $54 billion to K-12 education. If we look at how the CARES Act was allocated and allocate this $54 billion in the same manner, we would receive about $135 million. So that would definitely help to support the district getting through the next few years for shortfalls and potential shortfalls we're going to be facing. And like I said, this is not just an issue for FY22. We have challenges in FY23 and beyond. We know we're going to have increases in FRS, and we had the most recent voter-approved increase in minimum wage, which is going to have the most significant, it's going to start having a significant increase to the district in FY24. So with all of this uncertainty, we're planning on having board workshops and budget advisory committees every month beginning in January through the month of June to make sure to keep the board apprised as we go through this process, because we know that we're going to have significant changes throughout the year. So with that, that's the end of our presentation, and I wanted to open it up for any questions.
Questions, board members? Ms. McQuinn?
Mine's actually very simple. Do we have any idea statewide how many students were down?
No, I know that for next year, the state's projecting that they'd be down 83,000 students. But that's a mitigated number, assuming, a good portion come back, the kindergartners that may have deferred a year. So it would be significantly north of 83,000. We're still waiting on the final October numbers to come back. And I don't have an exact number for you yet. But when we get that, we'll share it with the board.
Ms. Burrow?
Thank you. And so you probably don't have any hard answers for this question, but assuming that once we have a new president in place and we're going to have a new education commissioner, do you have any feel for some of the funding issues that we've experienced? I know there's talk about restoring things that were cut. If you don't, I think that's something that we're going to need to get frequent updates on, because I think we're going to see a big change at the national level, which may be able to help us with our title schools, with some of the other grants, which may be able to help our budget. So hopefully you'll be able to have some information. I know it's premature, but January is around the corner, and hopefully we will see some changes rather quickly.
Yes, that'd be nice. I mean, as of late, that the big federal components are, Title I, IDA, they've been relatively flat. I believe a continuing resolution was passed by Congress just to keep, kind of basically kept things at the current state. But yeah, I'm optimistic we'd fare better with a new commissioner of education.
Mr. Burke, you mentioned the students that are missing. Maybe this isn't a question for you, maybe the superintendent staff, one of the other staff members, but I'm still hearing that we can't find 2,500 of our kids. I mean, do we have any clue where these kids are at? Out of the 7,500, I guess we're down. We've located 5,000, I understand, but 2,500, we don't know where they're at. Could these be kids that are sitting at home doing nothing, that are not getting educated at all? Does the district have any idea where these kids are at?
I'll take that one. So, Mr. Barbieri and the rest of the board, this is what we have come to realize, that your last point, there are some kids that are literally just at home whose families are not making them engage in an educational experience. We also discovered in the last couple of weeks, we have kids that are now sitting with relatives in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, to be honest with you. And Mike's team actually brought that to our attention, because we could see kids accessing their distance learning platforms from Bahamas and Jamaica and from other places. So, and I think a lot of families, sent their kids to places where they felt that they could be safe. And so that's what we don't have, we can't pinpoint every child, but we know based on the feedback that we've got that's sort of a summation of what we think those missing 2,500 kids may be.
So, Mr. Superintendent, what is the district doing to try and find the kids that we don't know, they're not logging in from anywhere?
Right, so Mr. Tierney and his team, led by Claudia Shea, they've created a district-wide initiative to reach out to those families. So based on the data that we have from the deputy superintendent's team. So each regional office and their principal supervisors and our principals are reaching out to the kids that they have on roll to identify where these kids are. Our school police department and some of our mental behavioral health support systems are making home visits and knocking on doors.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Andrews?
Just to follow up on that, at the last Royal Palm Beach Education Advisory Committee, some of these kinds of questions came up there, and I think it was addressed by Dr. Sheffield and Mr. Tierney the other night. So you're going to be bringing something forth. Can you share with the board what you're going to be bringing forth that's going to drill down on the same kinds of questions that we're talking about, the lost students, those that may be homeless, as well as what's coming for us, so we will be able to have a deep dive into this?
Absolutely, Ms. Andrews. And again, thank you for the opportunity on last evening. And the conversation that we had was around a lot of the components that's within our Spring Assurance Plan that talks about the re-engagement of our students, those that we have not been able to connect with, or those that are connecting but not on a daily basis, which surely is impacting their academic performance. And one big piece, which is Assurance 6, I should say, and one big piece that we're doing is that starting January 4th, second semester, as you are aware, we do have social workers within the district that are currently working within our regional areas. So to assist, because what we have found in terms of trying to make contact with our parents is that our hours from 7 to 3:30, many of our families are working. And what we've also found that not just our families are working, but they have the older ones, they're working too to help provide for their families. So we have really thinking outside the box, and we have our social workers, we have about 5 that we have identified that have agreed to work what we call part-time in system, to where they will be working evening hours. So we will have a set of social workers in each area that will be working directly with the regional offices, working with the principals, assisting in regards to those students that we're having a hard time making that connection with. Mark Howard and that team, we are able to drill down. So we're going to be providing that data, looking at the students, also working with school police to help with some of these home visits, to where we could actually go out, make that connection outside of the normal school day to try to reach our families. That's one piece. And the second part to that is that we're continuing to research with our high school students. We're finding that's where a lot of those students are working, because they have to help provide for their families, and they're needing some accommodations after school hours. So if you would think back in regards to some years ago, what we had the Sunset program, to where our high school students were able to come and attend classes on a non-traditional school hours. And one of our schools I know, West Boca, continue with that program, and they are funding that program on their own. Well, we're looking at putting a Sunset program in each of our region. That program would not be ready to go when we start on January 4th, but with our social workers working after hours, working with school police, making contact, actually going to doors, trying to re-engage. Those are 2 big parts of our initiatives. I also have June Easter and that team working with our homeless population, McKinney-Vento, that Mrs. Andrews is making reference to. Also with our teen parents, our PACE centers, and working with Harvey along with our ELL students, because that's a large group with our Maya centers, those students that have, and families that are having a very difficult time. We have that team that are out there in the community. We are hitting doors, and we realize that we have to get outside of the office and try to also do some of this work outside of our normal day, and that's our immediate plan.
Follow up, Ms. Sanders?
Thank you, Dr. Sheffield. I think you covered it, but I just can't let it go without saying to Mr. Burke and Heather how I'm always impressed with you and your work in the budget arena, sitting on those council calls every Friday, and all of the board members are welcome to be on those calls, but I've been sitting on them all summer. And Mr. Burke, your leadership with the Council of Great City Schools, with all these big urban districts like New York City and LA and all over, you've been leading the charge. So when I get on those calls and I see this information that you all have put together for us here in Palm Beach County, we're a cut above. So I want to thank you for all the work that you have done, because we are in a crisis all over the United States of America. But I can say, even though we may not have the money, we really do know why we need the money and the money we don't have, because you've gotten the information to us. So keep up the great work. And I always feel so proud because Michael Casserly and the council and the executive board, they always rave about Palm Beach County's budget leadership here. So thank you.
It's a great network. We benefit greatly from the board being members of that council. So it works both ways, but thank you very much.
And Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. I particularly like the way you present and drop in little things. So I have a couple of questions that will come from budget into my favorite area, which is academics. But I want to go back to these missing students. So one, do we know the demographics of the students that we haven't logged in at all, and those who, I know we have the data. I think maybe the board should see the data, right? So, and those who log on inconsistently, as well as maybe updates on the demographics of those who are coming into brick and mortar. So the other thing, though, is...
Dr. Robinson, would you like for us to prepare something for the board to see that data?
Yeah.
If the team could do that after the holidays, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, I think that the board maybe at some point in time, if we haven't seen it one-on-one, that we see the tool that our academic team is using to monitor the rigor of instruction, because I think of distance learning, because I think that that's terribly important. But I really believe that no matter what we do, as long as it's a computer, that it's not going to be as engaging as face-to-face. That's just my belief system, and my grandchildren tell me that's true. So do we have a spreadsheet when these social workers and law enforcement are knocking on doors and trying to find these children? Do we have a spreadsheet of those children that, like, this baby hasn't logged on at all, we knocked on the door on this date, nobody answered, we knocked this date, Sally Sue answered and said the baby lives in Georgia, or whatever? Like, do we have a spreadsheet like that?
No, it's not to that extent. They do document right now at the school centers in regards to every attempt that they've made. But so noted, as we start this new pilot on January 4th with our part-time in system, the after evening hours, I would definitely make note to work with June and that team in regards to trying to make certain that we are capturing many of those components in which you are making reference to.
I think it's also important to note, part of the plan we submitted yesterday, that documentation is it is required, so absolutely.
Okay, and then the other thing is, and in that same documentation, I hope would show who's in private school, who's homeschooling, and then also if we can get a feel on if they plan to come back at what point when the pandemic is gone, or like what the thoughts of the decision-making adults are around coming back to brick and mortar, and then also if they don't intend to come back, why, right? Because I think that we might, for those who have the means and who made a conscious decision to go, for example, to a private school or to a charter school or something, the question is why? Because we need to understand that from the parents' point of view. If it was just simply because they opened a brick and mortar before we did, okay, got that. I would expect them to want to come back when things get back to whatever normal is going to be, right? But I think we need to hear more from the parents who left, so that we can meet their needs and get them to come back, and then that will spin into Mr. Burke's budget, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I've said this for years, and I'm going to say it now, we need to hire some more grant writers. I mean, there's money out there. And in my work, like, in days gone by, I don't really know if we're still doing this, but it's like we expect teachers to write grants for whatever like their projects are, but there's some larger projects that need to happen that might happen across schools, like all elementary science teachers or something. But somebody has to have the nerve to dream of it, and then somebody needs to be able to take that dream and put it on paper for that grant that they saw, so that they're monitoring the horizon. We get those big giant grants. We have the grant writers who write those big giant grants, but there's some medium-sized stuff that's out there. And everybody and their mother is saying the word equity right now. And I think that we need to have grant writers who go after all that money that says equity for our post-COVID recovery, academic recovery plan. So I can start sending these grants to people because I see them all the time. It drives me crazy because I want to go get them. And I think our academic team has some very good ideas on how we could use that money to recover academically from COVID. But I just think that we need to look at how to get more grant writers. And I think that'll be it for now. Thank you.
Any other comments? Mrs. Andrews?
And we all know about the COVID slide, and we're hearing, and this goes probably to Dr. Sheffield and Mr. Oswald, about a lot of children who are failing, who have fell behind academically, and we'll be close to summer programs pretty soon. And I just really want us to have something in place that we're providing some support for these children before it gets to the point where they have failed everything and they actually repeat the grade. So I don't know what the plan is, but I'm hearing parents telling me, and I'm talking to the areas, that there's so many children failing everywhere. And we've got to figure out what we're going to do to help. The other night at the Royal Palm Beach Advisory Board meeting, the parent was talking about many of our upper-level students in the advanced courses falling behind because of distance learning and brick and mortar and simultaneous teaching and this and that in their home, and the teacher can't keep up. So as a result, some of these children are falling apart. So hopefully there's going to be some money in the budget, Mr. Burke, because it's going to be a big need as we talk about this COVID slide. It's real. And now I'm beginning to see parents call me to say, my son is failing. What are you all going to do about it? And I'm hearing the region office tell me that they're trying to find why are all of these children not signing in. They've failed, and they've got a report card now that may show all F's. So I know we're going to need a lot of help because some of us don't know where these children are.
Well, Ms. Andrews, I think that's a follow-up, and I'm sure Keith has something to add on to this. As we talked last evening, to your point, we are working on, as a district, the Student Academic Support Plan. And we call it the Student Academic Support Plan because we're creating a system that's going to help combat many of the instructional gaps that we're seeing over a period of time, because this COVID slide is real, and we know that we're not going to be able to close the instructional gaps this summer. It's going to take some time and some years. So, and with that, we have created the threshold and what we'll be looking at in terms of identifying our students, utilizing the MTSS, the multi-tiered approach, which will then allow us to tier the schools and so forth. But again, I'll go back to saying why we're calling it the Student Academic Support Plan, because it's going to be looking for those interventions, those strategies, and the acceleration pieces to help with all of our students, because it could be on grade level, and those students that are above. All of our students have been impacted with this COVID loss. They all will benefit from in regards to what are the next steps and what are we doing as a district outside of the core instruction to combat these losses. So Mike and the team, you're right. They will be coming and working with the group immediately after the winter break. We started this development in stages. It correlates very well with the next phases of, the Make Your Choice that we had talked about earlier in the fall. And I know on Friday, we will be talking with our parents and with our communities in regards to what are the next steps and what that's going to look like and how we are committed to supporting the needs of our students. But I can assure you, and when I look at the timeline and I'm thinking back, I think we have a timeline of that 3rd or 4th week of January to where we will share the very draft with the board in regards to what are we committed to and how we're going to combat this loss that will align with our strategic plan and so forth. But I think Keith may have some pieces that goes with that as well.
No, I think you covered it well. We've been working on a comprehensive approach. In addition, part of the executive order, we will be reaching out to all of our families, to your point, Ms. Andrews, who are failing a couple of courses in their core classes, as well as have limited engagement with signing into the portal or student attendance, to invite them to come back to brick and mortar if they feel safe to do so as required. Their schools have been working on this, and we've identified a number of students who would benefit being back in brick and mortar, and we feel we can still do that in a safe manner for our families.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. Can I just ask a real quick question about school food service? I understand that they are having some of the toughest times they've ever had. How does that impact the overall budget? Is there a place where we start having to backfill some of the issues of them not being able to produce as much food and feed as many kids? Or do we have to make cuts there at some point? What does that look like?
So it's a great question. The food service has been hard hit by the pandemic because they're basically reimbursed on the number of meals they served, and despite their best efforts to get meals out to the whole community, it's far down from previous years. So the latest estimate was that the food service budget would lose about $5 million this year, and we've already taken some steps to mitigate that loss by shifting some costs to the general fund. Food service for the last couple of years had been chipping in about $3 million a year on custodial costs to help keep the cafeterias clean. We've shouldered that cost for both last school year and the current school year to take pressure off their budget. We have lunchroom aides in our elementary schools that cost about $700,000 a year. Food service was not going to be able to afford that this year, so we picked that up in the operating budget. The stimulus talks that are going on in Washington do have a component that would help with food service, and it essentially provide about 4 months worth of reimbursement. Now they've been out of normal operating conditions for about 9 months now, so it's not, I don't think it's as much as people had hoped, but that may soften some of the blow to food service. But we're watching that really closely. We are fortunate in normal times in Palm Beach County, the food service budget's completely independent. They self-sustainable. They never need help from the general fund budget. This is a first, and we're watching it closely because as they deplete their reserves, we could get to a point where the general fund has to start to subsidize the meal program. And I know Ms. Monbleu is working hard to try to avoid that. So, and Ms. Paul as well. So.
Any other questions? Dr. Robinson?
Okay, so I'm gonna just dig into this some more. So, we're gonna talk about equity in just a minute and our mission and all that stuff. So let me tell you about some inequity in this whole COVID land in education. So some communities have the wherewithal to have like neighborhood educational pods, right? And so, if you are so fortunate that, one parent can stay home, that parent might be able to supervise the distance learning of several children in the neighborhood, right? So we know that's more likely to be a higher socioeconomic area. Lower socioeconomic areas may not be able to pull that off, right? And so I'm saying that to say that as part of our COVID recovery plan, I don't know, I'll convert to your language in a few days, I think, but as part of what I call the COVID recovery plan, then we need to look at leveraging our relationships with entities to help make sure that such pods are available to students in poor communities, if you follow me, right? I mean, I wish we had done this in March, right? But it's never too late. And we know, to Dr. Sheffield's point, they're not going to recover the loss over the summer. We also know, and so these pods could be used for after-school programs on a go-forward basis if we are able to make those arrangements. But we also know that the children that we were failing to do a good job with educating are the ones who are most likely to have fallen disproportionately further behind. I appreciate the fact that, the vast majority of children are not progressing the way they would have if we hadn't experienced this pandemic. But there's some who are falling off the cliff, right? And so I hear you talk about the MTSS approach. I appreciate that, the tier 1, 2, 3, all that. But I just want to be really clear. We're not talking about all. We have to make sure that we disproportionately apply whatever resources we have or our agency or community partners have to those who are in most need. And the last thing I want to say is we did those grade level essentials at the start of the pandemic, and I think that we need to promote them because we want parents to be active participants in this educational process, but we need to give them bite-sized chunks of things to do, right? So I'm hoping, for example, that as part of the ELA textbook adoption, we will give parents the adult sight words and say, do 5 cards a day or whatever. But we have to be really very intentional about reaching out in a respectful way and partnering with our parents. And the last thing I'll say right now is that I want to thank Dr. Sheffield in advance because she's participating in a town hall meeting tonight with a group called Golden Parents and the Coalition for Black Student Achievement, exactly to talk about, from the parents' point of view, what we do to prevent them from partnering with us. And so she's brave enough to listen, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Any more comments? Thank you, Ms. Canoose and Mr. Burke. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, happy holidays to both
Yes,
of you.
thank you.
See you after the break.
Mr. Chairman, before the next group comes up, I think it's important for us to quickly pause and reflect on the work that has been done over the last month. It's important for the board as a collective, for the district staff that will be tasked with implementing this work, and for other members of the Palm Beach County community who are also invested in this work. At my direction, district staff started working behind the scenes on a plan in late September to more formally engage the entire board in conversations around equity prior to the development of our next strategic plan. An external grant was secured in October that allowed us to search for a consultant with expertise in engaging school boards in equity work. We were lucky enough to secure Mary Fortakis in November, and she has been instrumental in helping the district get this work off the ground. We kicked off the equity, mission, vision, and strategic plan conversation with the board with a board workshop on November the 10th. The board, along with our student representative Santiago Alvarez and myself, participated in a short, self-guided equity study for the remainder of November, which was followed up by a one-on-one debrief with Mrs. Fortakis. The board, Mr. Alvarez, and district leaders dedicated 4 hours on December 4th as part of a board retreat to engage in courageous conversations about race and how current systems continue to perpetuate inequities as a result of structural and institutional racism. Today, Mrs. Fortakis joins us one last time to engage the board in discussions around our current mission and vision and potential revisions that may be needed to ensure equity will, in fact, serve as a pillar for our next strategic plan. This may also require us as a school district to take a hard look at our current